Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. If you ever visit Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh, you may spot in the shadows a beaten, bloody and bold woman limping through the hallways. Her ghost hasn't been spotted since 2014, but her story is one worth telling. Her name is Agnes Sampson, and she was one of approximately 2,000 women in Scotland who was brutally tortured and executed under the accusation of witchcraft in the 16th century. All kinds of ills that ever may be, in Christ's name, I conjure ye. I conjure ye, both mare and les, with all the virtues of the mass, and right so in nails so that nailed Jesus and no more. And right so in the same blood that raked over the ruthful rood, forth of the flesh and of the bane, and in the earth and into the stain I conjure ye, in God's name. That was one of two prayers that we have attributed to Agnes Sampson. They're the only words that have come from Agnes herself. Everything else we have are records of what others have witnessed her saying, whilst under excruciating and extreme torture. We don't know much about Agnes. We don't know when she was born, but we do know that she was working as a midwife at the end of the 1580s out in East Lothian. According to court documents, she was known as the Wise Wife of Keith, which means that she was from the town of Keith and likely a widow. From other remaining fragments of her disposition and partial records, we know that she had a daughter, a son, and a goddaughter, but their names and lives have been lost to history also. So how did Agnes get involved in this? Why was Agnes accused of being witched and tortured and killed for those accusations? Well, it all goes back to King James VI and a woman called Gailey Duncan. Enter, dear reader, into the realm where reality entwines with myth. Within the library of dark pages and eerie epistles, ancient knowledge waits eager to be unearthed. Amongst the dusty tomes and faded parchment, forgotten secrets stir and untold tales resurrect. Venture forth into this labyrinth of words and ink, where the boundaries of your beliefs shall be challenged, and chilling truths shall be exposed from the shadows. Welcome to my library, with all the twisted corridors where the line between fact and fiction blurs, and the whispers of the past lure you deeper into the abyss of mystery and macabre. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. As you know, I've been using Squarespace for all of my business websites for years because Squarespace makes making a website intuitive and easy to use. In fact, my Lady of the Library website is made by Squarespace and I love it. Look how pretty it is. I'm so proud of it. I blog on there about, personal development and anything I want. Squarespace is a place where you can blog or put anything you want out online. And if you're a creator like me and you want to make more revenue streams, then Squarespace is a perfect place for you to make that happen. I mean, the Squarespace has this whole members area where you can sell courses or classes to followers, and you can also build up a following over on, the old-fashioned way, using a blog. On Squarespace you can put blog posts up, and if people like it, they can subscribe to your newsletter, which is inbuilt in the Squarespace website, and you can collect names, and then eventually you can probably sell courses when you launch them, or merchandise, etc., all from the platform. And if you're curious about what people like and what people don't like about your website, then Squarespace has a whole analytics feature that tells you, about where your audience comes from, their location geographically, where they are spending most time on your website, what blog posts they like the most, how long they spend there, what topics are of interest, and so much more. And this is such valuable information for you if you're building up your career online. So if you're interested in going through your business or your blog with Squarespace, then go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Lady of the Library to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you Squarespace again for sponsoring this channel and today's video, and now let's get back into it. In 1589, King James VI of Scotland had chosen for himself a wife, a 14-year-old Anne of Denmark, who was to be brought over to him in Scotland. However, a succession of storms prevented the ship from carrying the young queen to Scotland, and James himself had to sail out to meet her and bring her back with him. But whilst abroad, the pair travelled. They went to Oslo and Denmark. And whilst sheltering in Norway, James heard the news of a Copenhagen witch trials, in which the accused confessed to raising the storms to prevent Queen Anne, who was the sister of the King of Denmark and Norway, from leaving to Scotland. You see, before witches entered the equation, the Danish Minister of Finance, Christopher Valkendorf, was a little bit in trouble. He had been accused of having insufficiently equipped the Danish royal ship that was rendering it unable to withstand the tempests, thus preventing the Queen from travelling to Scotland. Refusing to take the fall, Christopher came up with a defence. It wasn't his fault that the ship couldn't withstand the tempests. It was the tempests themselves. He explained that they had been created by witches in the house of Karen the Weaver, who was accused of summoning demons to climb the keels of the ship, where they conjured up a storm. Karen was arrested in July of that year, and she confessed, likely under extreme torture, to having conjured up the storms with a group of other women. One of the women she accused, Anna Coldings, was named Mother of the Devil. Again, whilst under extreme torture, she corroborated the story and named 5 other women, including Malin, the wife of the mayor of Copenhagen, and Margaret Jacob Scrivers. Anna Coldings was found guilty and executed by burning at the stake of Kronborg, along with 12 other accused women. James spent some time witnessing the trials and was evidently impressed with the Danish approach. The news of the trial's outcome had sparked conspiracy in James's mind. The Danish witches were evidently conspiring with the Scottish covens to prevent him from marrying. This now made sense to James. After all, the weather had hampered his journey both to and from Denmark, and he had to stay there for 6 months in her country, unable to return with her. Additionally, one of his ships that was carrying all the wedding gifts for his new queen sunk on its way to Scotland. This was when James decided to start a witch hunt of his own in Scotland. News about the trial and the king's musings spread to Scotland, and those eager to curry favour with the king sprung into action. People started hunting out witches amongst those they lived with and worked with. And this is where poor Gailey, or Gaylis Duncan, enters the tale. I'm going to choose to call her Gailey, but both names are used. Gailey was a young lass who worked for a man in Tranent named David Seaton, who held some sort of bailey or civic officer power. Since the news from Denmark hit Scotland, David had noticed some strange changes in Gailey's behaviour. She would sneak out at night and go for long walks, seemingly alone, and began to exhibit miraculous healing powers. In the autumn of 1590, David imprisoned Gailey in his home and interrogated and tortured her, and examined her body for the devil's mark, which he found on her neck. Under torture, Gailey confessed to not only being a witch but plotting against the king with witches in Denmark. Gailey was treated as the lead soldier in Satan's army. Her head was shaved and her body was scarred and marked with torture. This is a trigger warning, and I'm going to give a disclaimer for discussions of torture. I'm going to talk about techniques that were used in the torturing of these women, and I want to ensure that these details are included because the torture that these accused witches underwent is not to be minimised, but you may want to skip forward at least 2 minutes or so to be safe. Methods and devices used during such interrogations included the breast ripper, which was used on a number of accused women. The breast ripper was a spiked tool, often heated during torture. It contained 4 claws which were used to slowly rip the breasts off women. The instrument would be imposed on a single breast of a woman. They were designed to shred or tear off the breast of the victim. Similarly, a device known as the scold's bridle was also used to prevent Agnes Sampson from speaking, who we'll get back to later. This was a crude iron device which forced 4 sharp prongs into the victim's mouth. 2 of these would press onto the victim's tongue, whilst the other 2 pressed against the person's cheeks. Other methods for torture included thumbscrews and bracts, also known as an iron muzzle, leg vice, which crushed the limbs of the victims, and strappado, a form of torture in which the victim's hands were tied behind their back and the victim was suspended by a rope attached by the wrists, typically resulting in dislocated shoulders. Under such torture, Gailey told the king that she and others flew across the sea in a chimney-shaped boat to meet the devil at Eerie. In her confession, Gailey named several witches: Agnes Sampson from Haddington, Agnes Thompson from Edinburgh, Dr. Fian from Prestonpans, the wife of George Motts from Lothian, Robert Grierson, Jeanette Sandilands, the potter's wife, Euphane MacLean, and Barbara Napier, along with 70 other names. This is where Agnes re-enters our story. Agnes Sampson was the oldest of the accused, and she was ordered before the King James for questioning, but she refused to answer anything. She was detained in a prison where she, too, was shaved all over and examined for the devil's mark, and tortured until she confessed. The news from Scotland in 1591 detailed Agnes's interrogation. Quote, "It has lately been found that the devil does generally mark them with a privy mark, by reason the witches have confessed themselves that the devil doth lick them with his tongue in some private part of their body, before he doth receive them to be his servants, which mark commonly is given them under the hair of some part of their body, whereby it might not easily be found out or seen, although they be searched, and generally, so long as the mark is not seen to those which search them, so long the parties that has the mark will never confess anything. Therefore, by special commandment, Agnes Sampson had all her hair shaven off in each part of her body, and her head thrown, constricted, by a rope according to the custom of that country. Being a pain most grievous, she continued almost an hour, during which time she would not confess anything until the devil's mark was found upon her privates. Then she immediately confessed whatsoever was demanded from her, and justifying those persons aforesaid to be notorious witches. The devil's marks were nothing more than birthmarks, moles, or spots. And contrary to the suggestive nature of this report, Agnes's devil mark was not found on a private part, but on her right knee, not her genitals, which demonstrates how deliberately sexualized these events were. The minister, James Carmichael, delivered these salacious accounts to illustrate the urgency of the holy war against the devil and his minions, when really, he was an obsessive sexual sadist who was living out disturbing fantasies against innocent people, especially women. The sexual nature of women accused of witchcraft is not to be underestimated. The story of a demonic pact with the devil often involved them having intercourse with him, leading to interrogators asking them what the devil's penis looked like, and if they'd kiss the devil's anus. The ministers and noblemen torturing and interrogating these women wanted to know where the devil had touched them. They took a lot of pleasure in degrading, humiliating, shaming, sexualizing and torturing these women. Agnes was brought before the king once more, and this time she told him of her devilish deeds, which took place in Samhain in 1589, Samhain being the Gaelic version of Halloween. According to her tale, she and others flew in sieves to North Berwick, drinking and carousing the whole way. The procession was led by Dr. Fian, and gaily played her Jew's harp as the witches danced towards the kirk, singing, "Come a go ye before, come a go ye before, give ye we not go before, come a ye." King James requested gaily to play the song to him to prove the legitimacy of Agnes's tale, and she did. Agnes continued with her tale, explaining how she and the coven gathered at the old St. Andrew's Kirk in North Berwick to meet none other than Satan himself, who appeared as a man in black. The devil proclaimed the king was his greatest enemy and demanded he be killed. Then, in a strange ceremony, the devil removed the joints from bodies buried within and without the kirkyard, assembled a person who would then do his bidding, and then each of the witches kissed the devil's buttocks to seal their promise. North Berwick is a quaint fishing town in the east of Scotland's capital, Edinburgh. Just 2 miles from the coast lies a small uninhabited island called Fitra, whose shape Robert Louis Stevenson based his map of Treasure Island. And just beside it lies Bass Rock, which was largely uninhabited, but also aside there was a time when there was a settlement of an early Christian hermit on there. It too has a literary history, featuring once again in one of Stevenson's books, Catriona, as well as the 2021 book The Bass Rock by Evie Wyld. Agnes had a reputation for witchcraft before her trial with the king, purely due to her age and status. Being elderly, widowed and impoverished was enough to convince accusers one was a witch. She told the king on January the 27th that her allegiance to the devil was inspired because the devil offered to help her and her children, and she desperately needed his help as a poor widow. Agnes claimed the storms she and the coven had raised to help the devil was not just those that affected the king himself. They were also the storms responsible for drowning Jane Kennedy, a companion of Mary Queen of Scots, on the 7th of September 1589, when ferry boats collided during a sudden storm on the 4th. The storms that impeded the king's journey, she claimed, were created by making a charm, by sinking a dead cat which had been delivered to them by Satan, to which her companions had attached parts of a dead man, into the sea near Leith. Additionally, Agnes told the king that a stolen picture of him was passed from hand to hand in front of the devil, and each hand wished ill upon the image. At another meeting, a wax figure in the likeness of the king was passed amongst the witches to cause the king harm. King James initially doubted the legitimacy of Agnes's confessions. Though she had previously refused to confess, reports say that under the accusation of being a liar, she became eager to prove her guilt. Agnes stepped up to the king, leant over, and whispered in his ear the exact words that he'd said to his wife on their wedding night in Oslo, and the answer the queen gave him back. According to the news from Scotland, the king swore by the living God and declared himself that not even all the devils in hell could have known what Agnes did. Agnes proved her sorcery to the king, and for that, she and the others fell. Agnes Sampson was taken to the scaffold on Castle Hill, Edinburgh, where she was garroted and then burned at the stake on the 28th of January 1591. Dr. Fine, a schoolmaster, was another accused witch who was forthcoming under torture. As one of the most educated amongst the accused, he was believed to be the devil's clerk, and his reputation was as a womanizer and a sorcerer cemented his guilt to the court. Dr. Fine managed to escape his imprisonment and pleaded that all his confessions were made falsely under the torment of extreme torture, but no one accepted his retraction. Barbara Napier was the wife of Archibald Douglas, a well-respected man in Edinburgh. She denied all accusations of witchcraft, though confessed to having consulted witches in the past. She was initially cleared of all charges, but the king intervened and reversed Barbara's outcome. She was found guilty and sentenced to death also. Eupheme MacLean was also a member of the Edinburgh gentry. Still, accusations against her were not connected to North Berwick witches, but rather the conspiracy to kill her first husband using witchcraft, and for using witchcraft regarding matters of love. Despite solid legal representation, she was also found guilty and sentenced to death. Richard Graham was an excommunicate with a reputation for sorcery, and he was accused of being one of those who commanded Gailey bring the coven to North Berwick. He confessed to raising the devil on more than one occasion, and was sentenced to death in 1592, a little after all the others had been executed. Richard, Agnes and Gailey all brought forward another name when under torture: Francis Stuart, the Earl of Bothwell. Bothwell was the cousin of King James, but was a notorious conspirator who led several uprisings against the king. Bothwell denied all relations with any of those who brought up his name, especially Richard. Richard had told them how Bothwell had had several meetings with him in which Bothwell discussed how enchantment could be used to kill the king, and was even sent money by Bothwell as a bribe to keep his allegiance a secret. Bothwell was imprisoned in Edinburgh Castle in May 1591 and was found guilty of conspiracy to kill the king by June. He was declared a traitor and exiled abroad, but Bothwell escaped, fled up north and went into hiding for 2 years. In 1593, Bothwell was caught and brought to trial, though with the extent of his supporters and unreliable nature of Richard, the sorcerer, who had accused him, Bothwell was acquitted of all charges. It was pretty convenient that Bothwell was brought into the name considering the relationship that he and King James had. Many believe that these 3 witches that named Bothwell were coaxed into doing so, but we'll never know for certain. What we do know is that Agnes Sampson was fastened to the wall of her cell by a witch's bridle, kept without sleep, thrown with a rope around her neck, shaved, beaten, sexually tortured, her breasts ripped from her chest, and only after these ordeals did she confess to 53 indictments against her. And this was likely the same fate for at least 70 other people who all accused of witchcraft between the years of 1590 and 1592, before they were strangled and burned at the stake of Edinburgh Castle. Agnes showed herself to the world for one last time in 2014. A maintenance man was fixing a faulty lock late at night in the palace when he saw in the corner of his eye a bold woman limping towards him in a slow, agonised movement down a well-lit corridor. The maintenance man screamed in terror, and Agnes immediately vanished. The second most famous sighting of her ghost occurred over a decade before that incident in the 1990s, when the Chancellor of Germany, who was visiting then, was seen running in fear from his office that he'd entered. When asked what was wrong, he responded that he'd seen a naked and transparent spectral form floating mid-air with outstretched arms towards him. If you ask me, I think many more ghosts should be haunting that palace. After all, what other form of justice can they ever receive? The least we can do is keep their names in living memory. Thank you for listening to Dark Pages and Eerie Epistles with me, Cinzia DuBois, the Lady of the Library. Today's episode was researched and written by me, and all citations and footnotes are included in the description box of the YouTube video format of the episode, which you can find at Lady of the Library. The music was supplied by Epidemic Sound. If you would like more content from me, you can find me over on YouTube at The Lady of the Library, where you can also find links to my Patreon, newsletter and episode request form. Special thanks to all of my patrons, but including my top tier patrons, Arch Capitalist, Nicholas Reed and Andrea Bazil. Remember, dear listeners, as we delve into the realms of folklore, monstrous legends and wicked creatures and haunted chapters of history, you must keep yourself safe, as these dark tales hold a dangerous and twisted allure. So stay bewitched, haunted and forever curious. And remember, books save lives, so keep reading.